Oh, hello. Welcome to CraftQuest on Call. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us, whether you're joining live or in the recording at craftquest.io. I'm Ryan Ireland. I am your host and the person that you can blame for everything on CraftQuest. So we have a special episode today, a special live stream. We are going to be talking about Datastar and what it is, how to use it. We got some demos, some cool stuff. And we've talked about Datastar before, but this time we have on one of the maintainers of the project and someone not unfamiliar to both Craft CMS and CraftQuest. We have Mr. Ben Croker. Hello, Ben. How are you doing?
Hello, Ryan. I'm great. Happy to be back.
Yeah, it's great to see you. You look like you're phoning in from a bird sanctuary. So
Pretty much, yeah. Costa Rica is known for its birds, and we have plenty of them. So you may hear some, although I've closed all the windows and doors, so it may get a bit clammy in here too. Sorry about that, but
yeah, no, all good. You just
sound should be good.
I'll cut away when you need to wipe your brow. So we were going to be joined also by my usual co-host Andrew Welch. He's running a little bit behind. He had an appointment that is going long, so he will join if he's able to get here on time. But if not, we've got plenty to go over, and we have the Data Star expert here. So we're not gonna Ben, we're not gonna get into too much banter here. I want to make sure we leave enough time to do all things Datastar. So let's do that. All right. If you are in the chat and you have a question for Ben, you can drop that in the chat at any time. I'm going to be monitoring the chat and see if there are any questions. And that's whether it's something related to what Ben is talking about or even just a general question about Datastar that we'll handle when we get to the end of the live stream. We'll go through. I know some people also sent in questions, and we'll look at those as well. So please chime in the chat, talks amongst yourselves, and let's have a good time doing this. So Ben, before we get into any demos or anything, I want to set the stage for everyone for what Datastar is and what it can do. So I'm going to tell you what I think Datastar is, and then we'll build from there. So it's a framework for building reactive web applications, right? That's what it says on your website.
Yep.
It is something that can do what HTMX can do and Alpine.js, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. You're the author of Sprig, which is the Craft CMS implementation of HTMX. But I guess the biggest selling point there is that it combines both, but at a smaller payload, right? The actual framework size is much smaller than both of those combined.
Yes.
Okay. One of the terms that you use on the Datastar website is that it's a hypermedia framework. And that's, to me, it's kind of cool because it feels a little retro. Like I feel like it's,
Mhm.
a little bit of a throwback, but maybe you can explain what that means. I feel like that comes up a lot on the website, but also if you've been in the Datastar Discord, it comes up sometimes as well. So
Sure.
is my definition correct? And then maybe you can chat a little bit about hypermedia framework.
I think that is a great way of introducing it, especially considering that many people will be familiar with HTMX, on which Sprig, of course, builds, and then Alpine.js. But those are just some examples of frameworks to as a handy comparison. Let me back up. So
Sure.
yes, Datastar is a hypermedia framework, and the web browser is a hypermedia client. So in other words, Datastar is built for the web browser. The only use case that I would probably not suggest people use it for is if they're doing offline applications, in which case you probably want to be writing the application in the native language of the device that you're targeting. So at its core, though, it is a JavaScript framework, but we don't really highlight that because the idea is that it's this tiny 14 kilobyte JavaScript file, single file with no external dependencies that you either call from a CDN or from your server. And it gives you the ability to do, as you said, everything that HTMX does, which is kind of back end reactivity, going to the server, re rendering things in Twig. Well, and now I need to say a little, I need to differentiate, right? So I'm going to say when I'm talking about Datastar, I'm going to be talking about Datastar, the framework, the JavaScript client. Datastar also has an integration for Craft CMS, which is called the Datastar plugin. But
Mm-hmm.
let's say, just for convenience, when I say Datastar, I'm talking about the JavaScript framework. And then when I'm talking about the plugin, I'll just say the plugin. So Datastar, the framework, provides all of the capabilities that HTMX does. And what that means is that it's very comparable to something like Sprig, because Sprig builds on top of HTMX. The Datastar plugin builds on top of the Datastar framework. The issue, or let's say the point at which I got to last year, and we did a ton on Sprig, right? Sprig has been out for, I think, around 5 years,
Yeah.
has over 12,000 active installs. It's being used on all sorts of
And
sites
we have
that are craft powered.
hours of content on CraftQuest on Sprig that you and I worked on.
Yes, we
Yeah.
do. Because 5 years ago, this idea was quite novel
Mm-hmm.
in the craft world, at least. But with HTMX coming along, uh, it seemed like the perfect time. Now, people might be wondering, well, what does Datastar offer, and why is Ben jumping ship? And it's not a case of jumping ship. It's kind of like, for me, this is the next generation of these types of solutions. The issue with, or my issue with HTMX and with Sprig, is that it gets you 90% of the way there. And that last 10% turns out is quite a lot of work. I'm not going to say it's 90% of the work, but you kind of get the idea, right? Like, it's maybe half of the work, because HTMX and Sprig gives you the back end reactivity, but what about the front end reactivity? Like, you want things to also happen instantly when you interact with the front end, when you don't need something to be re-rendered on the
Right.
server. And that's when you would reach for something like Alpine JS, or something like even Petite Vue, which is, I don't think it's very actively maintained, but it's kind of like a scaled down version of
Yeah.
Vue.js. Or you might reach for something like jQuery, even though that's gone a bit out of fashion, still really good. Or you might just go for native JavaScript. The issue with those is that, well, with native JavaScript, you're writing JavaScript code. You have to implement the front end reactivity. And if you want to do that, that's fine. You'll have zero dependencies. My issue with, or the issue with something like jQuery, is that it takes this imperative approach. So while it provides conveniences, you still have to kind of go through the steps of what it means to add reactivity to your front end. And then the issue with something like Alpine JS is that it is this external library, and trying to get Alpine JS and HTMX to play nicely together takes work, and you are, adding an extra dependency. Um, just to give you a rough idea, Datastar is smaller in file size than each of Alpine and HTMX. And we kind of claim that it can do what both of those do
Yeah.
when combined. So that's the general idea. And honestly, if you told me 6 months ago that I'd be maintaining a JavaScript framework and writing TypeScript and Go, and putting out podcast episodes, because we have a podcast now,
Yeah.
and maintaining, we have 12 backend SDKs, and we're just doing a ton of stuff that I never would. Yeah, I would have been skeptical if you told me. Put it that way. But it's been a wild ride, and if life is like a theme park, then you can go on the spinning cup ride, or you can go on the pony carousel, and I chose to go on the roller coaster with a big scary skull on the front, and I'm hanging by my armpits, and my feet are dangling beneath me. So it's been a wild ride, but I'm having a great time, and that's a good thing, because as you know, free open source software doesn't pay the best. Actually, it doesn't pay at all, right? So this is very much a labor of love, and it's something that I'm having a great time working at, but I also believe in what it can make possible. And we're going to look at some demos, so I'll be able to show some of those things off to you.
Excellent. And you maintain this. There's two of you, right, that are essentially the core maintainers. I think he hopped in the
Yes.
chat, by the way.
Well, yeah, Delaney is going to be causing ruckus in the chat probably. He's the original author of the library and came up with the idea, and I joined around 6 months ago as co-maintainer.
he is he is he's bringing some of the ruckus from Discord into the chat, which is good. Um, all right, so that makes sense. That's a good frame of reference for everyone. Is it's sometimes the server side stuff, right? The HTML over the wire isn't enough. You want to add in Alpine JS that complicates things. The idea behind this is to fuse those two and simplify. What was the genesis of the Datastar framework? Am I right that Delaney did a lot of web application work with like was it like data visualization? I can't remember exactly what kind of work he did that came about
Well,
this.
this is interesting. I think this is actually an important point. Delaney comes from a totally different background to me in terms of software development. He comes from game development
Okay,
and
yeah,
real-time applications, whereas most people know I'm heavily involved in Craft CMS. I've been working with PHP and content management systems for many years. So these very different backgrounds, and yet we both believe deeply in this idea of what Datastar is trying to achieve. And really, to put it another way, I think Datastar is just a way of embracing hypermedia. And if the web browser is the ultimate hypermedia client, then it just makes sense to me to build, for the operating system on which we're kind of building for.
right,
Does that
right.
make sense? So, but to get back to your question, I believe the genesis of the project was to take HTMX and turn it into TypeScript and make it more pluggable in terms of an extensible architecture. So I think the original idea was to see, okay, what happens if we take HTMX, which is written in an old style of JavaScript, and we turn that into something more modern. And originally, that's what he set out to do and kind of prove a point. And it wasn't really, it was kind of met by deaf ears. So he kind of moved on and went off in this other direction. And there is one important distinction as well. I feel like that definition I gave of what Datastar is in terms of like bringing these two types of solutions, front end and back end reactivity, into this one cohesive solution. I feel like that gets all the attention.
Yeah,
There is another aspect to Datastar, which is that rather than purely a request response, the response that you send back is not what you would expect with HTMX, which is your content type would be text slash HTML. It's actually text slash event stream, and
mm,
we're streaming back SSE, so that is server sent events.
okay,
And server sent events are actually nothing new. They're nothing to do with these fancy fads that we see coming out of the JS framework ecosystem. They're actually an old technology. We just don't use them that much, traditionally speaking, but they work over HTTP 1, 2, and 3. And I'll kind of demonstrate what is possible with those, because that's where I think Datastar really deviates from these other solutions and gets really interesting in terms of possibilities.
okay. Now I'm intrigued. I know you've prepared like demos and stuff, so I'm gonna leave it to you to guide us on when to jump into that. I don't want to belabor the explanation too far. I think sometimes it's coming from someone that creates videos to train. It's sometimes easier to show than it is to say.
I think it is interesting to just get the backstory and just get well, we have the backstory, but where in terms of where we are now,
Okay.
we worked for many months during the pre-release phase in terms of getting the API to a place where we feel really good about it. We launched the V1, the first beta version of version 1 on the 2nd of January. So it's been close to 2 months. And what that means is that we're just kind of allowing people to put it through its paces, making small incremental changes, but we're trying to avoid breaking changes wherever possible. But now is the time to kind of finalize the API. And probably in the coming weeks, I don't want to put a date on it, of course. We'll see how things continue to go. But if they go at their current pace, probably in the coming weeks, we will release the V1 stable. And to us, what that means is that once V1 is locked down, we will follow SEMVer very, very pedantically, meaning that we will not introduce any breaking changes. And ideally, in an ideal world, there will be no V2 because we will be able to maintain backwards compatibility for the duration of the project.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We take inspiration from SQLite that's still, I believe, at version 1. Obviously, there'll be minor releases, right, where we're adding things or
Right.
improving things, but in terms of changing the API and breaking people's applications, we're going to avoid that at all costs.
Okay. But it's not too. But after this live stream and the people that are watching it are intrigued, it's not too early to jump in and start using it, though, right? Even though you're not at a V1 release.
We are V1 beta 7. So
Okay.
we are technically still in beta, but Datastar is being used in production. And it's being used to do all sorts of things, including very, what am I trying to say? Very high level, real time, all sorts of applications. It's in place. Yeah.
All right.
So I think now is a wonderful time to jump on, if you think it's right for you, and we can talk about. I mean, in terms of comparison to Sprig, I don't want to get into that too early. Maybe we'll come back to that towards the end. How Datastar compares to Sprig and which one you should opt for,
Right.
depending on what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah. We can hit that. I know that question has already come up in the chat, and I think also via email, so we can jump on that. But let's give people an idea of what Datastar is first before we start to compare it to other things.
Great. So I'm ready to show the first demo.
Okay. All right. You got it up on your screen. I'm going to share your screen with everybody
Yes.
here. Oh, Pokemon. All right.
So you've seen this because this is something that you've shown before. This is a demo that Andrew Welsh put together, and Andrew is a very early adopter. And this is, I just want to show this quickly. I know that you've shown this, but this for me covers a lot of the use cases that people building craft sites will want to have available to them. One, of course, is live search. So as I search, results are showing up. And then we're combining that with filtering. So I can add a filter. I believe this is grass. So if I go to something that's not, exactly what you would expect. Mm-hmm. And these searches and filter, this is going to backend. This is a Craft CMS backend, and these Pokemon cards, or I don't know what you call them, characters, are entries in the CMS. So this example is available on GitHub. Hopefully somebody can share a link in the chat. If not, I guess you'll post one.
Yep.
And it's open source, so you can see how this works. One of the things that I'm not sure if you're seeing on the stream is this nice fade effect. And I want to highlight this. It's kind of transitioning using a fade. And this is an MPA. This is a multi-page application, right? So as I filter and search, those results are just coming in. But when I click on details, you'll see the URL changes. So this is going to a different page. But view transitions are a recently implemented API in the browser. And they're so Datastar helps you. I don't know if you saw that. When I search for things, then we're seeing it, which is kind of Datastar is helping with that. When I click on details, you get that transition, even though we're going over to a different page. And this is, I just wanted to highlight this because people may be interested in a new CSS rule called @viewTransition. Support is good, but unfortunately on Firefox, not yet available. Which is unfortunate for me because I generally use Firefox, but that's fine. You just don't get that nice fading effect. And the reason I bring this up, actually I'll come back to this later, but this is a nice way of getting your app to feel like everything is working smoothly, right? And sometimes it helps to smooth over the fact that we're going to the server and coming back. So we're doing that round trip, which includes some latency. And if I do edit, then I can inline edit this Pokemon, and I can change the type that updates immediately. So that's an example of some front end reactivity using signals, and everything else goes to the back end. And I think I'm not logged in, which is probably why saving is not working. So I just wanted to highlight this because for me, this is kind of the number one place you should be going to if you want to see I want to say real world. It's not real world, obviously, but a kind of similar to real world example of how you do these things directly in Craft CMS.
I think live search filtering, that's a real world implementation. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and inline editing too, right? So you could imagine, here we're editing an entry, but you could edit a user profile, or you could have an add to cart button, or you could have a add to wish list, or whatever controller action it is you're targeting. Okay, so that's kind of the base demo, but I don't want to show the code for that because I know that you've looked at it and it is available on GitHub. So let's look at that search in a bit more detail and how that works. So here, this is now running locally, but I do have this hooked up. This is a Craft CMS instance. And if I search, I have some lorem ipsum stuff in there, I guess. Let's search for this. Yeah, then we see our search results coming in. I'm not sure if you're seeing it, but there is that kind of fade effect as well.
Yeah, that's coming through
here
for me.
And what did I want? Oh yeah, so let me come back to the point with the view transitions and why those are really helpful, and why a lot of things I feel in general have just come together. The timing of many things have come together to make now a wonderful time for Datastar. And one example is this, this view transition API is available in the browser for us. You can of course do this with CSS transitions, but it's just a bit more work. Here you're essentially just adding one. You don't even have any work to do. It's just a configuration where you enable view transitions in Datastar, and it's available to you. So what do I want to show here? I want to show the network request, of course. So when I do a search, we get a network request that goes off to the server. And what we're sending is, I guess in the payload, we are sending the query. I know this is encoded, so it may be hard to pull this out, but we're sending the query set to $E, and the response is in an event stream tab. So Chrome makes this available when it detects that your backend is streaming events back to you. And here I can see, okay, this is the event. And let me open this in the raw view because I think this will be interesting for people to see. I guess it's up here. This is what a server sent event looks like. It is just plain text, and it's essentially a wrapper for some data that you're sending. So everything before this point, everything I'm highlighting here, is part of the wrapper that is defining that this is a Datastar merge fragments event. I have set use view transition to true. That's all I need to do. And again, that's just a configuration setting, which makes that nice fade effect come in.
Yeah.
And then everything followed by data fragments is the hypertext or the markup that I want to be swapped back into the DOM. And as I search for other things, we'll be able to see the more events come in. So it is still a request response, what you would expect. I send off a GET request, I get a response back, and then Datastar, the framework, is interpreting this, and it's saying, okay, well, here's the fragment. I'm going to swap this into the DOM, and by default, our merge is based on a morphing algorithm. This is provided by something called idiomorph, and it will match a DOM element with the ID of result that's already in the DOM with what we sent back and just perform that swap for us.
Okay.
So that's the basics, but I also want to show some source code. I think this is the point at which we can get into this. I do need to, I think, stop sharing for a moment and
Sure.
Switch over. I will share, I guess, everything. Yeah.
All right. While Ben is doing that, I'm keeping an eye on the chat here. I did put the repo in there in the chat. Someone said that was wondering if it's out of date. Did you just recently clone
Shouldn't
that,
be.
Ben? But I think it should be working. They're wondering if
Yeah,
some of the
should be working.
syntax changed.
No, we've been keeping that example up to date. So you should see the last commit was like in the, I don't know how long ago, but in the last week or two, I guess.
Let's
And
see.
if there are any issues, I can go fix that.
Yeah,
So
is
I'm
it
ready
in?
to
I'm sorry.
share
Is it
my
in
screen.
Andrew's
Oh, just make sure it doesn't start with Spark. It's craft Datastar.
dash
What is it?
Pokemon dash demo?
Yeah, that sounds like it.
Okay, yeah. So that should be working. All right. So you got some source code here.
Yes.
All right.
Is my screen up?
It is.
Great. So this is the source code for that demo I just showed. Here's our input field, and I'm going to show you all the tags that we have on this to make this work. So Datastar it was named after data dash attributes that it uses. These are semantically part of the HTML spec, and this is how you know that this is Datastar. So we have these attributes, including data bind. Data bind binds this input element to whatever key we give here, and that means that now query is a reactive signal. For anyone who's not familiar with signals, signals are a way of getting this front end reactivity. And signals, interestingly, are probably or almost certainly going to make it into the actual spec, meaning that they'll be natively available in web browsers. But really, most JavaScript front end frameworks already use signals because they're so ubiquitous these days. But you don't really need to understand this. What you need to understand is that when I bind an input field or an input element to query, now I have this signal called query that I'm able to use, and which will be sent to the backend anytime I make a request to the backend. And here is another data attribute. I'm using data on, which is essentially adding an event listener for click events.
Mm-hmm.
And here I'm passing in the path that I want to, or in this case, it's the template path that I want to pull back from the backend. So it's really just those two things. I'm binding the input field to something called query, and then on clicking that search button, we're going up to the backend. And this this is where we're now talking more about the Datastar plugin.
Right.
This part here, right? Because this is Twig, this is specific to the plugin. And what the Datastar plugin for Craft CMS allows you to do is drive the front end from the back end using Twig templates. Very similar to how Sprig works. The difference being that in Sprig, you have this concept of Sprig components. We talked about this ad nauseum, I feel like, Ryan, but you have this concept of Sprig components and you make your entire component reactive, whereas Datastar takes a different approach and you can have as fine-grained reactivity as you want. So you can swap out just that little piece, which is what I'm going to show now, or you can even do macro swaps. You can just swap out like essentially everything that's in the body of your page. Some people prefer one approach over the other. I prefer to go for the more fine-grained approach. But again, the difference being that it doesn't, unlike Sprig, it doesn't box you into this component model. I feel like, I don't know if I should say this. Yeah, I feel like we're kind of sold a lie in terms of all the JavaScript frameworks for like components. It's all about components, and you can componentize, and everything's self-contained. And in my experience, that's not how web applications work, or websites, right? You have a page and you have like different things on the page that can react to each other. For example, if you add a product to your cart, you probably have a cart in the top right, and maybe you have like a cost summary in the right hand sidebar, and those things need to talk to each other. And that's been one of the challenges, I would say, with Sprig. Sprig makes it possible, but but fitting that into your mental model is sometimes difficult. So Datastar breaks out of any of those limitations and says you can update any part of the DOM anytime. So let's get back to this code. I'm just using this helper, which essentially this is just going to return an action, we call it in Datastar, which will send off, whenever this button is clicked, will send off a request to the backend. And here I can pass in the template path. So I've put this over here. This is what the backend is going to render. This is how I generate the results, and I'm just getting the search query from the signals. I mentioned signals already, and because I did the bind, that comes back to the backend. And if that's set, then I'm just doing a craft.entries. I'm limiting the section to my test section, and I'm passing in a search item with the value of that query that came in, and I'm fetching the first one. And here's where I actually do the swap back into the DOM. I wrap this in a fragment twig tag, and here's my div, and I send back, if the entry was found or exists, I'm going to send the entry title, otherwise say no results. So was there a question there, or should I?
So everything but, you heard me inhaling, everything but between fragments, that's what denotes what's going to be merged back in after that request is sent, or the response is sent back. Okay.
Yeah, so this is specific to the Datastar plugin, which provides fragment and a couple of other things. I'll show those in a few moments. Yeah, but essentially this is a way of running backend logic using a templating language, right? So depending on I already said that we have 12 SDKs, backend SDKs. So there's one for PHP, which I wrote, and on top of that you have a Laravel package, which is a very thin layer, which is just an integration for Datastar, the framework with Laravel. Obviously, there's one for Craft CMS, which is the Datastar plugin, which is what we're looking at. So these are just ways of simplifying the workflow so that you don't need to. However, it is optional. You can create your own controller action. I will show that too in a subsequent demo. But I should move on.
In the chat, Matt asked that the fragment replaces, it's based off that ID, right, of the element.
Yes, that's an important point. So here I have an empty div with the ID of result, and that's what is going to be, so what I send down, it's going to match by ID, and it's going to swap that in. It is possible to use different merge modes. For example, it's possible to append or prepend things. Appending I tend to use for something like infinite scroll or like a load more button, but otherwise the default morph swap tends to be the best one to use and the simplest one. And it works really well because it will just like swap out what has changed rather than just blowing out the DOM, and which has advantages, but we can come back to that maybe. So I just want to show you how easy it is to turn this from a normal search where we have a button to an active search. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same pattern as before, data on, and I'm going to use key down. I might add a debounce of, let's make it small, 50 milliseconds. And I'm going to kind of copy just that action here, put it in here. And it's very important for us that, so we've worked tirelessly on the API. And this is part of the API where you declaratively say what you want to have happen. And by that, I mean lay out the steps and imperatively write out the steps that need to happen. You kind of just write out the result that you want. So the result that I want is that on any key down with a debounce of 50 milliseconds, do this. And if I go back to here, refresh the page, and start searching, now you see that we get live search, and it's nice and fast and snappy, even though I have a debounce set up. And as I'm typing, we're getting new results coming in. And if I was to open the network tab and start typing again, you'll see that each time I type with that debounce, we're getting a different response come back. And each time that response is going to contain, when there are results, I guess there are none, is going to contain one single server sent event, as we saw before. So that's the general gist. And if people comprehend this demo, then I think you are a good part of the way there.
Okay.
Any questions about this before I move on?
No questions. Are you getting autocomplete in there? Was that from the browser or someone was asking?
Autocomplete?
I didn't see that.
No, I think I've disabled autocomplete. Oh no, I haven't. No, there's no autocomplete. I was
Okay.
typing with my fingers.
Okay, cool. No questions so far. Let's assume
Perfect.
everybody groks this, and if they don't, so this will be up on in the catalog for CraftQuest, so you can rewatch it if you didn't grok it. And then yeah, let's move
Well,
forward.
that's great because I have more demos and more
Yeah,
to show. So
yeah.
this is your request response. I talked about why. Well, I talked about the fact that I believe that server sent events and how we're using those and streaming those down is kind of a superpower of, and perhaps an overlooked superpower of Datastar. But I want to show you what that means. So if I open up the network tab again and I hit start, what we're getting here is I have a delay of 1000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So every second a new letter is coming in. And you'll see that I just have one network request. And if I open up event stream, I was a bit too slow, but if I open that up again, you see that these events are streaming
Yeah.
in real time. This connection is staying open. So if I look at timing, it's now 11 seconds, 12 seconds, 13 seconds. And now it's finished. We've typed out hello world, so it's stopped. So this is a bit of a trivial example, of course. We're just saying hello world, but you can imagine maybe fetching search results or fetching entries or fetching anything that's happening in real time. And now we're able to stream those down to the browser in real time. And as the browser receives those responses or those events, it is able to do the swap that's necessary. Notice what happens, of course, if I change this. So this is currently happening at, what is it? Every second, right? So we're essentially outputting this at 1 frame per second. If I take a 0 off, this is now being output at 10 frames per second. If I take another 0 off, this is 100 frames per second. I don't know if the stream is even picking it up, but if I open the network tab, that is what's happening. We're streaming this down at 100 frames per second. And if I take the last 0 off, I mean, it's going to appear instant, surely to the stream. And if not, then maybe because there's some transition effect. But essentially here, in this case, we're streaming down at 1,000 frames per second.
Which
So when I talk about
for our work, in live search and things like that, it's probably not as practical. I mean, 1,000 frames per second, I'm not sure how practical that is. But the idea of this faster streaming of data, I could see in the world of browser-based gaming and things like that is obviously is where all the power is.
Sure, and I would say, so I think that there are some applications that maybe we overlook because
Okay.
in the CMS world or PHP world, we're not used to having this ability.
Right.
So whenever you want to show something's happening live, like maybe there's a live ticker, or like you're watching a stock, or you're watching a game, and you want to have, or you have a dashboard where you're monitoring CPU usage or resources or any of these things, where traditionally we reach for polling, essentially like every second or every 5 seconds, just go to the back end and request the changes. Here, the back end is determining the rate of polling, or there is no polling. We call it long polling sometimes. The back end is determining when to send those events down.
Yeah.
One thing I maybe forgot to mention about SSE, as the name suggests, server sent events, it's unidirectional. So you can send a request up, and that connection that comes back down from the server to the client can be persistent. It can, is that the word? It can be a long-lived connection. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. And if that connection is open, then you can stream things back to the front end, as we just saw. And let me show you what this looks like, because this is very similar. We're just binding an input field called delay. And on click, I'm sending that to the hello world Datastar template. I'm fetching the delay from the signals. This is my message, but of course this could be anything that I pull out of the CMS. And I've just got this for loop that I'm looping over the message length. And each time I am sending down a new fragment with a different part of the message, or so we start off with at 0, and then of course we spell out each individual letter, and then we're sleeping for that delay that we sent up. So we're in complete control here, and we're still using Twig. It's pretty crazy to me. And just to show you, I've shown you fragment, but I said I would show you something else. So here, for example, I'm going to set the delay. I'm going to make it dynamic. I'm going to set the delay to whatever I is in that for loop times 50. So it's going to increase over time. So we're going to kind of get this deceleration effect. And then I'm going to update the signal. So I'm going to do that by saying do signals.set delay to the new value.
Okay.
And this is a way of, from the back end, not only swapping out fragments, but also updating signals on the front end. And what that will look like, so when I hit start, we'll see that this number increases over time. Those signals are coming back down, as are the fragments. And if the point for me at which this clicks is when I start realizing, oh, I'm driving my front end from the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's do one more thing just to help drive that point home. Another thing that we can do from our Datastar template is we can execute JavaScript. So let me put this outside the for loop. So when that for loop completes, we're going to execute a script, and it's just going to say alert done. And now do this again. And when we get to the end, pop. So I remember, actually, this is just came back to me now, this memory of doing demos like this with Sprig, and thinking, wow, this is a demo. Like, this is a really great demo. But it didn't even compare to this. When you connect the dots and you realize, oh, so from my back end, I can modify fragments in the DOM, I can update signals, I can affect the front end behavior. And what I mean by that is that that's the next demo. Sorry, I'll come back to that. But we can modify the front end from the back end in real time, so that the next time the front end speaks with the back end, the front end has been modified, and we haven't had to encode that in JavaScript or some JavaScript templating language that a front end has given us. We've been able to stay purely in HTML. And just note how much work this took. It was one data attribute there and one data attribute there. That's all it took. And the rest is driven by the backend. And even that should be code that looks familiar to anyone who's worked with Twig before in Craft CMS.
Yeah.
I will stop sharing my screen just for a moment, or yeah, I can do that here.
Yep.
And so I can jump back and look at the chat and see if any questions came up. I do see that Delaney mentioned, thank you, Delaney, that we have a VS Code plugin, VS Code extension, which helps with autocomplete. And we have a JetBrains plugin, which Andrew wrote. Actually, it's excellent for things like PHP Storm. So that's what I was using. Maybe if the person was referring to that type of autocomplete.
That's what he was referring to. That was the confusion. Yeah,
okay.
was the autocomplete in your editor. Yep.
All right. Next time I'm in the editor demoing something, I'll show that again. How are we doing on questions, on time?
Questions, good so far. Delaney's been really helpful in just answering some of them in line here. There was a question about overusing signals and should be using fragments. I'm not sure if that's too advanced for what you want to talk about right now, but that came up. let's see. I think that was it so far. Yeah.
Great. So a lot of people look at Datastar and they think, oh, well, Datastar is for real-time applications or game development. Yes, you can do all of this stuff, but I would claim, no, Datastar has a place for everything from simple CRUD apps to real-time stuff. So there's one more demo that I want to do, and Ryan, I would like you to take the steering wheel here.
Oh, all
I
right.
sent you
I have to
two
work.
links.
Yes, you did.
Well,
All right. Let's see here.
click a few buttons, yeah.
that's about my qualifications here. Okay. I'm going to pull up my screen here. So here we are.
Yes, perfect. So you have, I don't know what these are, but you have, okay, you have a regular Firefox on the left-hand side, and on the
Yep.
right-hand side, you have it in private mode.
Yep.
This is, as you can see, this is on my website, putyourlightson.com. So this is not running locally. This is going out over the web. And I don't know what that gray border is on the right-hand side. That does not appear on mine. It works here.
Okay. We can ignore it.
But we'll ignore that for now. I think just seeing this, a lot of people might know what's about to happen. So Ryan, if you could, on the left-hand side, if you could click into that text area and just start typing.
Okay.
Put your focus on the keys and great. So what we're seeing here is on the left-hand side, you're editing or you're typing. On the right-hand side, you're seeing what you're typing, right? So, and yeah, you got kind of a time at which that's happening. And if you even arrow around or click to move your cursor to a different part of the text on the left-hand side, then that cursor should kind of follow you.
Yep.
So this is Datastar and Craft CMS on the back end, and I think this is impressive. But we've had stuff like this in collaborating editing tools for many years, right? Google Docs and so on. So why am I showing this? Well, I think that there is a place and an opportunity in the control panel in Craft CMS to do this kind of stuff, right? At the moment, the only thing that we have is that when I'm editing, when one person is editing an entry and another person comes into that entry, you get like a little notification to see who's currently editing there. But there is no way of collaborating. Hopefully, it's not a huge leap of the imagination that on the left-hand side you can be editing, and on the right-hand side you can be editing too. And now you have two people or more people editing at the same time.
Yeah.
So I just didn't take the demo all that way. But of course, on the left-hand side, you could have one person working on one part of an entry, even the same field, but it could be different fields, and the other person a different part of an entry. And of course, they can see what each one is doing in real time. So that's when I say, I think there are applications for this real-time kind of stuff in Craft and in content management system, both in the control panel and the front end. This is the kind of thing that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
So if you could open on the left-hand side your network tab.
Yep.
I just want to show you very quickly how this is working, and just start typing and we'll see a bunch of network requests happening. So those are posting up to the server. I think I have a debounce of 50 milliseconds or something like that. It's quite low. But essentially every keystroke is going up to the server, and on the left, so that's on the left-hand side, we're just sending up one direction. And if you were to do the same on the right-hand side, you will have to refresh the page just to see that first network request. If you limit it to XHR, this is Firefox, this is not Chrome. But anyway, you see that there's one GET request there.
Yeah.
And that stays open. Firefox doesn't have great event stream dev tools, so you won't see much when you... Actually, maybe you will. If you click onto that GET request.
Not the failed one, this one.
Oh, it's not failed. It's still open. Oh, yeah, not the failed one, no. And you go to response. Yeah, and you start typing on the left-hand side. Like I said, the support in Firefox for this is not great. Okay, you're not seeing those, but those events, you can take my word for it, are streaming down. And actually, if you could share my screen again.
Yep.
Sorry, just one moment
Sure.
while I set this up. Yeah, if you could share my screen again.
All right, we see it.
Great. I've intentionally made this a very difficult to type URL because I didn't want a bunch of people jumping in on this. But you should see my screen now, and I'm it's the same URL that you have, and if you keep typing now, I
Okay,
should be
let's see.
seeing the same updates in real time. So you're viewing this, I'm viewing this, and in theory, anybody else on the stream who has the patience to type this into their browser will
That's
also
me
see
typing.
these live updates. That is you. That does look like your type of typing. Yeah. Great. So I'm showing this because I think this demo in particular, because I think it has really interesting applications in terms of a content management system. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, I also want to show how little code it requires. So back here, are you seeing my code editor?
We are.
PHP Storm? Yeah. So here's my text area. And I realize I haven't explained what all of these things are or how to use them, but I think it's quite intuitive. I'm defining a signal called cursor because I have that cursor position that I'm tracking. I'm binding this text area to a signal that I'm defining and calling content. And then on click, but also on key down with the debounce, and also I have an interval. So every 15 seconds, I'm sending it up as well, just as kind of a heartbeat to keep the connection alive. And then expression is something that I've just set up here. This is great because in Twig is our templating language. So I'm able to use all of the tricks and things that I've learned over the years, of course, using Twig, and I'm able to transfer that knowledge or just keep using that here. So rather than just type this out 3 times, I've just put it in. But essentially, I'm doing the same thing on click. So when you click into the text area, just so I can track the cursor on key down, and every 15 seconds, just sending a heartbeat up. And what I'm doing is I'm setting the signal value. So $ represents the signal, which is nice because it kind of looks like an S. Whereas this is our other symbol, which is an @ which is for action. So this is how you know that you're dealing with a signal in Datastar or an action in Datastar. So I'm setting the cursor value to the elements selection start. That's just so I can track the position. And then I'm sending a post request up to this action URL. So what I'm doing here that's different than before, previously I was using datastar.get, it would be datastar.post here, but I actually want a custom controller action, which is how I'm doing this, the backend, because you might be thinking, well, okay, you have, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 data attributes on the front end, but the back end is probably really complex. Let me quickly just show you this is the editing live edit template. Let me show that you the live view template.
Yeah. Which
Yeah,
would
this
have
is
been
just
the
a
right side of my
single.
screen, right?
Correct. Yeah, and this is just a single data on attribute on load. So when the page loads, or when this element is loaded on the page, I'm just calling a get, and that is the long. You opened it up in the network tab. That is the long lasting connection that stays open. Actually, I wanted to show it. If you could type, please, Ryan.
Yep. 1
I'm
second.
I'm looking at this in Chrome, so the dev tools are a bit better. And as you're typing, these events are just streaming in real time, and you can see if this is hour, minutes, seconds, then we're at milliseconds. So that that when I was talking about frame rate earlier, that does actually come into play here, because I want, if you can keep typing, I want a high frame rate so that it feels like I can see exactly what you're typing in the moment. Okay, thank you.
You can't see my emojis. Oh, no, it
I
came
do
through.
now. Yeah,
Oh, it did come through. Okay.
yeah. So, but just one. line of code. And these are not even lines of code. This is a data attribute on HTML, right? So this is what Datastar gives us. This is, to me, why I like to say that Datastar solves the front end, for me at least. Maybe it's not for everybody, but for me, it's like solved. But like I said, you might be thinking, well, the back end is probably doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And I want to show you the back end because it really isn't doing much. Okay, so before we begin, what we're seeing is this kind of streaming thing, right? So I don't want to save it to the database each time and overwhelm the database. Probably what I would do is like every 5 seconds or every 10 seconds or so at some reasonable interval, you might save to the database. But in the meantime, all we're doing is we're sending messages up and down. And Redis is something that comes pre-installed on most web servers these days, or if not, it's very easy to install. It's kind of ubiquitous in the PHP world. And it has something called PubSub, which is a publish and subscribe messaging system. And when I went to set this up, I already had Redis on the web server because I use it for managing sessions. So there was no extra setup for me. SSE doesn't require, unlike WebSockets, it doesn't require anything special on the server. It doesn't require complicated handshakes or any of that stuff. But let me briefly talk you through what we're doing. So I have one action here for the publishing part. I'm calling get streamed response, which is a helper that the Datastar event stream gives us. That's part of the PHP SDK, which is available, which is what the Craft plugin is built on top of. So we are getting the content, and this is just a helper which extracts the content and the cursor position out of the signals, and then wraps it. So I'm just creating this span with a background of orange and a width and a height, so that, and it's blinking, so it kind of represents that live cursor. And then I'm just putting the content around that. So that's I'm splitting the content up so that you have the content before it, then the cursor, then the content that comes after. That's essentially it. And then I'm getting the edited. So that's just, edited by Ryan at this time. And this just grabs the current time. And then I am creating a Redis connection and I am calling the publish function. I'm giving it a channel and I'm giving it the value. So just like Redis, if you've used it as a key value store, you usually call Redis set to set the key value and fetch it out of the store. Here we have publish and subscribe. So I'm publishing to this channel and I'm publishing to this channel. And then on the receiving end, the sub, we do the same thing, but instead of publishing, we're just subscribing to both of these channels, content and edited. And what we do is we pass in a callable that receives the Redis connection, the channel that has been updated or published to, I should say, and the message. And then we're just merging that back into the DOM. So this is the backend code in its entirety. And hopefully it should show like just how simple this is. And it's not that Datastar is like doing so much work necessarily. It's that it's making reactivity declarative using these HTML attributes. And really the rest then is up to the backend. And you can just start getting creative on the backend. And I'm using Redis here, but you could use whatever type of store you wanted. And you could just get very inventive in terms of what it is that you're doing. And Datastar kind of gets out of your way and lets you work either with Twig templates or with controller actions, or you can do anything with your custom modules and plugins. And that's the part that is really invigorating for me. I can now I almost have this superpower that allows me to it opens up this world of possibilities on the back end, and that's where I personally want to innovate and develop my skills.
Yeah. That's a super cool demo. I mean, I had an idea when you shared that with me that, what we were going to do, but that's a really cool demo. I don't know if I have anything more to say about it than that. I'm still kind of processing that. That's very cool. Someone has access to the instance here. Someone typed in the
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Unless you maybe it's
Okay.
Delaney. Did you share it with him too?
No, just you.
Oh, okay. Because someone
Unless
is asking, is
unless your
Datastar a
computer's
cult?
been hacked. Not that I know of. I mean, it's news to me.
Yeah. Um, that's that's super cool, and I appreciate you sharing like I guess like the more advanced view or use of Datastar and Craft. And I know you hinted at like, you know, control panel or editing, you know, in like an admin interface or a control panel. Um, it would be cool to see a feature like that in Craft CMS, you know, powered by Datastar. Um, yeah,
Yeah, like I said that we all know this from collaborative editing tools like Google Docs, right? But what is the big difference here in terms of Google Docs and Craft, like the control panel? The big difference is that Google Docs runs on Google servers.
right,
They're in control of the web servers that are powering this. When you're running Craft, Craft runs on whatever the hell infrastructure you want, right? It's self hosted. So that rules out things like WebSockets, which is what traditionally powers these real-time applications. WebSockets requires specific things on the web server. It has more of a complicated handshake and connection protocol. It only runs on HTTP 1, whereas, like I said, SSE runs on HTTP 2 and 3, so you get that full multiplexing. It's and that for me is like that is the power that has been unlocked by using server sent events. That now I can do, like I've worked with WebSockets before. It's great when you're in full control of you know all aspects of the stack, and we are with Craft in a sense, but you don't know what infrastructure it's going to be on, right? It's and um, it brings up some interesting questions. Actually, it brings up the elephant in the room, or two elephants in the room,
it's
and
a
it's
lot of
not
love.
us, Ryan. There's
Those are just been trying to eat less. Okay, go ahead.
it's not you and I. The first elephant in the room is appropriately PHP
Mm,
because the logo, right? Um, PHP is single threaded, and it's not a language like Go, where it can scale up to thousands of threads at the same time. We are limited by the CPU that we're running on and the memory. So, question is, well, is PHP even suited for real time applications? And these, in particular, like these long lived connections. Traditionally speaking, PHP spins up, it bootstraps the entire application, destroys it, and spins down. Right,
right.
and you try to make that as that time during which it's spinned up as short as possible to save resources, to serve more requests. And that's why we do things like eager loading, hit the database only when we need to. But here we're like keeping this long-lived connection open for the duration of, as long as I'm watching you type, that is, that is PHP is working. So how do we deal with that? And I think my answer is, well, we limit the number of connections that we make available. We probably don't want to do real-time applications that are publicly open to everybody. Now we can. There are tools like FrankenPHP, Swool, Roadrunner, React PHP that allow you to bootstrap your application into memory, and then they can serve thousands of concurrent requests without any problem. Unfortunately, in PHP, applications are generally not written to work that way. The general assumption is that the state of the world is recreated on each request. So you don't have to worry about memory leaks. You don't have to worry about state leaking into other connections. So one idea is that we can try to rewrite our Craft instance to work in that way, and the other one, which I think is more feasible, is that we limit what users are allowed to do things that involve these long-lived connections. So, for example, in the control panel, it's safe to assume you're never going to have more than 100 people watching the same entry. In which case, no problem. Like it's no problem to have up to 100 concurrent connections open. Again, you would want to monitor your resources and see what uh, what happens and how it affects them. So that is one of the elephants in the room, I would say. The other elephant in the room, as far as I'm concerned, is Craft Cloud, because Craft Cloud has this complete other architecture, and of course, anything that Pixel Tonic puts into Craft CMS will have to work on Craft Cloud because that is their first party hosting solution. And Craft Cloud is serverless and it runs on AWS Lambda. And AWS Lambda has a maximum lifetime, I believe, of currently, maybe it changes over time, of 15 minutes. That means that your connection can stay open for max 15 minutes and then it's going to be forced to close. I think there are workarounds. Like I think, maybe 5 minutes before that happens, you could just reinitiate the connection. You could, I don't know about the details of how you do that. But the question is that even desirable? Because I believe AWS Lambda pricing is based on it's the cost is based on the time that those lambdas run for, and it's probably down to the second or even millisecond. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it is practical for Craft Cloud to have those long-lasting connections, but I think this would be a very interesting thing to explore, and I hope that the Pixel Tonic team eventually do, if they ever consider having collaborative editing in the control panel.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Ben, do you want to get to some questions, some rapid fire
That's
here?
the question.
All right. So we had some questions sent in, so I want to make sure we go over those. And I'm just looking through the chat here as well. Let's see. All right. Let me grab some questions from the chat, Ben, or from, sorry, that were sent in, and I shared those before. So, let's see. Oh, this the question.
Okay.
I was gonna say one question that came in was about a use case for this, which is about updating it when someone updates an entry in the Craft admin panel, that automatically streams to the front end with Datastar. Is that without a page refresh? Is that something that is currently possible?
Yeah, I think that demo hopefully showed that it's possible, right? You were just working in an empty text area, but you could imagine that is a field that you're editing in an entry in the control panel, and I, as a user that has access to a window into that, could be watching that, and anytime you make a change, and that could be any keystroke or anytime you save that entry, that event could be streamed down to my browser and output in whatever way possible. So
Yeah.
absolutely 100% possible today. Yeah.
And I guess it would just
In
depend
terms
on
of how to do that, you would just hook into the save event
right.
of the entry using a custom module, and
Have fun
then
with
you would
that.
have some sort of
But no, but the I was gonna say, but you'd have to determine like if it was gonna be on an actual save or if it was gonna be as a draft, right? Because and then you would just retrieve that from the database and then send that to the browser, and then yeah, pretty much.
yeah.
In theory, not that
I mean,
complicated.
if we're talking about doing stuff that originates in the control panel, using a custom plugin or module, you can hook into pretty much anything. And if you needed to, you could, you can use JavaScript. You can inject JavaScript in there, but I don't think that would even be necessary.
Yeah. So obviously, Ben, as the author of Sprig and kind of bringing the world of HTMX to Craft CMS, I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions with comparisons between the two. Like, I can do this in Sprig. How can I do that in Datastar? One of the nice things that you created in Sprig was you created a playground, but you also created the recipes as well. Is that something that is or would be available in Datastar as well? Like kind of bringing like one-to-one some of those recipes over so people can see how that type of work would translate over into Datastar?
Well, I think the mental model is very similar. I think Datastar, as we've seen, has some things that differentiate it for sure. But if you get the mental model, I don't think it's a big switch from Sprig to Datastar. With Sprig, we did a bunch of learning resources, and you helped me, Ryan. So we did live streams as well, and we did online training, and I did in-person training, and just tons and tons of stuff. Part of that was because I thought it was important to show people not only how it works, but how to take full advantage of it. I feel like if you already have that knowledge, then you just transfer that over to Datastar. And realistically speaking, though, I don't have the capacity to be maintaining, the entire framework as well as the plugin and generate all of these free learning resources. Like I just don't have the time in the day, and I don't know is the answer. I don't think I will be porting all of the Sprig learning materials over to Datastar. Almost certainly not. But will I do, like, I don't know, trainings on Datastar? Yeah, I'm open to that. I don't know if that was the question, but
That
I'm
was also a
open
question
to,
that came in about whether you're going to do
yeah,
that type of training on Datastar.
open to it for sure.
Yeah,
Hopefully, I don't know if Datastar is for everybody. If it's definitely for people who are comfortable on the back end because it's back end driven. It's probably not for people who want to recreate SPAs using Datastar. If you want to do an SPA, please use an SPA framework. Datastar is not trying to replicate any of that functionality. We say that Datastar is a full stack framework and can do anything that an SPA or JavaScript framework can do. But we mean that in terms of functionality and features. We don't mean that in terms of, oh, you want to do front end templating? Datastar's got you. No, no, no. You do back end templating. And Datastar allows you to drive the front end from the back end.
okay, so we talked about Datastar, the plugin that you've created for Craft CMS. So this is the Datastar implementation for Craft CMS. You do have some examples here, including a link off, or I guess a running version of Andrews. I guess maybe a link off to it. Yeah, a link off to Andrews, and then an example of inline editing entry as well. And there's a lot of just fundamentals here for how to use it as well. So it's a good place for people to get started. And I've said several times already that this live stream is part of me trying to have more craft specific Datastar content on CraftQuest, and there will be more of that coming as well. So Ben, you can lean on me a little bit to help. So that's not on you.
Great.
Like you said, that's part of the uh, you know the open source community, is that it's not just all up to the maintainers to do all of the things to get everybody up and running, because that takes contributions from all over the place. All right, let me just pull up the.
I do see some questions in chat, which I might quickly address, if
Yes, go
that's
for it.
okay.
Yep.
So I see Austin asked if the module controller could be bundled into the plugin. I'm not sure what that means. Datastar, the plugin, has a controller which handles the routing of your requests to the Datastar template. So that's already included, if I understood the question. And otherwise, you can do your own custom controller. So you can write your logic in Twig, or if you prefer, in PHP.
I'm
And
going to
then
bring
I
up the one from
see,
John Henry about. Is there
yeah,
any example where you would say just stay with Sprig for this? Don't use Datastar in this example.
yeah. This is a great question, and my answer is, like, if you're using Sprig, especially if you have it in production and it's working and it's doing what you want, don't port it over to Datastar unless you want to do it as a learning experience for yourself. I don't see any reason to if it's working for you. In my experience, I have done a lot of ports from Sprig to Datastar just to see what it looks like and get a feel for it. Um, I really like the end result, but the process is a little bit time consuming just because of this mental model shift from Sprig components to fine grained reactivity with Datastar. So I would not even bother porting things over. I would say if you have a new project that needs reactivity, that's the perfect place to maybe do your first Datastar project, or play with some examples, but start from a blank slate.
So another question is if you have an entire search component built with Sprig, can we add a little data star to it to add some reactivity without rewriting everything? Can it be like a sprinkle framework?
You can. You can. I mean, then you're just using Datastar as if it was like an alternative to something like Alpine
Alpine,
JS.
yeah.
Yeah, you can do that if that's if that makes your life easier. Sure, why not?
Austin also asked if the live editing viewing demo can be shared. Is that something that you're prepared to share? I'm not sure what the state of that
I thought
is.
I just shared it. What do you mean? It's like
Oh,
five lines of code.
I think he means the code.
It's 5 lines of code.
All right, that's your
Sure.
answer, Austin. Um, let's
Like if he watches the videos again, like it's literally 5 lines of code. I don't
There
know.
you
I
go.
can put it somewhere, but
The
I've not
video will
planned
be
on
up in the catalog. You got a shout out from Esteban, who's also in from Costa Rica. So you guys are maybe that's your neighbor. I don't know.
it. Could be.
Esteban, do you also have loud birds outside your windows like Ben does? Are you staying in a nature preserve, Ben, or is that just all of
Costa Rica is one big nature preserve.
Sounds wonderful.
Um,
Okay, Austin's talking about the controller code. Understood.
yeah, I can send it to Austin if he wants.
Sure. Okay, there you go, Austin. You asked, and you shall receive. We got a question about potentially which I think is an interesting approach. It's probably more something for me to do, which is converting a Sprig implementation over to Datastar and showing how that works. Ben, you actually sent me some code for actually it's relevant to right now. So like in the navigation of CraftQuest, there's that little pulsating live thing, and you sent me the Datastar implementation of that. So maybe that's something that I can take on to show like the differences between those. It's still running the Sprig or HTMX version, but that's a good example of polling versus. I think you had mentioned to me. To be honest, I haven't looked at it too closely, but you had said it would be much better than just like constantly polling to see if we're live, and the Datastar implementation would be a little bit less, like maybe not, I guess, wasteful, right? In just constantly polling the server and asking if it's live or not.
Yeah, so I don't remember your exact implementation, but I believe it's a Sprig component that's polling every 10, 15 seconds, something
Right.
like that. And it's just checking, is the live stream currently live at this moment? In which case I'm going to show a blinking red light or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting question, yeah, because you see, I think this helps to highlight how we're driving things from the back end. So you've taken a very simplistic approach at implementing this. For example, that you stream on Thursdays. So
Twice a month.
so why right? So why are you polling the server on a Sunday morning, for example, right? So you could do something like you could have not Datastar in your Twig code, right? You just detect the day of the week. If it's any day except for a Thursday, don't even poll, right? That just reduces load on your server. Reduces otherwise load that would be on your server from that polling. And then if it is Thursday, maybe you want to poll every 30 seconds, but maybe like 10 minutes before your live stream is scheduled to start, because I think it's always at 12 o'clock, or maybe you even have an entry in the CMS that says, next scheduled date and time. So your Twig code could just check, when does the live stream start? Oh, it's in 10 minutes from now. I'm going to decrease the polling interval to every 5 seconds. And if somebody's just sitting on your website there with the page open, and that polling continues to happen, the backend is able to adjust the polling. Similar to, if you remember the example, the hello world example, I
Mm-hmm.
was changing the delay from the backend by updating that signal. In a similar way, it's a little bit different, but in a similar way, you'd be able to dynamically adjust the polling frequency. And then once the live stream ends, it just stops polling altogether. So this is just a nice example of not so much like it's a very trivial thing to implement. Like showing this in Sprig versus showing this in Datastar, I think is going to be just a trivial example. What's more interesting to me is like the possibilities on the back end of getting really smart about how to save resources and again be fine grained about things.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's a point that you had mentioned in a message to me. Very cool. All right, let me just pull up the chat again here real quick. Esteban said that he was born hearing loud birds. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, this is good. Any last questions before we wrap up here for Ben? Otherwise, please rewatch the live stream if you either came in late or you want to revisit some of the code, and check out the plugin for Datastar for Craft CMS and Ben's documentation. Y'all have a Discord server as well for Datastar, which is not specific to the Craft implementation, but it's just project wide. But that's a place. There's a help like forum section there if you have questions. That's a good place to post. And
We have a
definitely.
Craft CMS channel too.
Okay,
in
perfect.
there.
Yeah. Then that would be helpful because there's people implementing in all sorts of different languages that aren't going to be just for Craft CMS. All right, Ben.
There are lots of examples on the Datastar site as well. I'm in the process of writing how-to guides, so those are up there as well. Those are time-consuming, but I think very good. And we have a podcast, so you can watch us on YouTube or listen to us on your podcast player by just searching for Datastar, I guess.
Okay, so that's going to be data-star.dev. And then, you said show me some examples. And you also have this original HTMX version here as well, so people can compare and contrast. Even though I know the HTMX implementation is slightly different than the Sprig, but I mean, if you've used Sprig enough, you should be more than able to digest what is happening in HTMX and then carry that over and bridge that gap. So so check out all of that. And if anyone has Sprig implementations that not Sprig, Datastar implementations they've done in Craft already that are in production, send those over to me. I'd love to share those out if possible, so people can just get some inspiration about what others are already doing in Datastar in production if you've done that.
I'm aware of a few, so I'll send those to you, Ryan, as well.
Yeah, that would be great.
I noticed a question just came in from Martin. If you could share your screen again, just the page you had open, there is the possibility of using Datastar in the control panel. That's control panel usage on the left-hand side. And that gives you a Datastar module because Datastar for Craft CMS is like Sprig, split up into the module, which actually contains the majority of the logic. And then the Datastar plugin is really just a wrapper around that so that if you're building a custom plugin, you can take full advantage of Datastar in the control panel without any setup whatsoever. You just require it and start using it.
Very cool. All right. Ben, thank you for being here and for doing this and for suffering through an hour and a half of having your windows closed in Costa Rica. Hopefully you're doing all right.
I'm okay. I'm going to go jump in the pool after this.
Jump in the pool. Appreciate you being here and walking through this. Thanks for everyone for joining us. We had a great showing here on the live stream today. If you're new to CraftQuest, we have like over 1,000 videos and a couple hundred, 273 live stream videos, like both with the actual full live streams and edits. Check all of those out. There's so much stuff. There's lots of stuff with Ben on Sprig. If you're still, Sprig is still a completely valid thing to use. There's no reason to to
It's
ditch
not
it. So
going anywhere.
yeah, it's not going
Yeah.
anywhere. So check out all of those. But this will also be in the catalog. I'll work on that today and get that the recording of this live stream up and running for y'all to check out. Ben, thank you for being here.
Thank you,
As I
Ryan.
said, my normal co-host Andrew, he was stuck in an appointment. He was going to be here, but I think we got along just fine here. But we live stream CraftQuest on Call on the first and third Thursday of every month, and so we will see you all again on the next one. And thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. We'll see you later. Bye bye.